Hello and welcome back to the kitchen. When you first start, it's quite difficult to understand where to even begin. And I think a lot of advanced pipe smokers just assume you understand how to choose your first pipe, and things that seem obvious are not obvious to a beginner. So I really struggle with this. So I'm gonna try and break down how you might want to think about choosing your first pipe so that you can understand how to make better decisions so you don't waste money. So I'm gonna quickly tell you what we're gonna go over in the video. So the first thing is the different materials that pipes are made from, such as Briar, Meerschaum, things like that. Then we're going to look at the pipe shape, such as apple, billiard. This is an area where I'm not actually very knowledgeable at all, so I'll be learning here myself as well. Then we're going to look at the different finishes that you get on the pipe, sandblasted, rusticated, things like that. Choosing the right pipe for the tobacco that you might want to smoke in it. This is quite an important thing, I think, and again, this is something that people that smoke a lot think everyone understands this, but actually it's not very obvious to someone that's new what pipe you might want to choose for the specific tobacco you enjoy. Then we're going to look at practical things to consider when choosing a pipe, such as the shape, where you might want to use the pipe, so the size that you might want to choose, how long you want to smoke for, things like that. Again, this isn't always very obvious, so someone telling you choose the one you like the look of doesn't always help. Then we're going to look at manufacturers, and we're going to look at one specific pipe brand and just focus on that. And what I hope that will do is help you to understand how different manufacturers categorize their pipes and catalog them. And finally, we're going to have a little look at my own collection, and I'm going to talk through why I chose the pipes I did and my thought process behind that. This I think might be helpful because there's definitely been mistakes I've made, and there's been things that I chose that I didn't even think I would really like. I just maybe bought it and I ended up really loving it. So I'll talk about that and I'll expand on my ideas around that. Let's get into it. So wherever possible, I'm going to try and use real world examples. And if I don't have the real world example, then I'll show a picture of it. The most common pipes you're going to hear talked about are Briar pipes. And this is the most common material that you see pipes made out of. Now there is obviously lots of other different types of wood. Majority of pipes you're going to see for sale are going to be Briar pipes. Briar is one of the best materials for pipe making because the wood is very heat resistant, but it's also easy enough to shape and mold for pipe makers to actually form it into a pipe. There is other woods that are also very good, but they can be very hard and difficult to basically shape and form. So that's why you're going to see Briar pipes an awful lot. You're probably going to hear a lot of people talk when you very first start about corn cobs. This is actually formed from the husk of a corn cob. So what they'll do is they'll put this in a lathe, they'll take off the excess material and put plaster on it, and then this creates what's called a corn cob pipe. So again, quite a common pipe you're going to hear people talking about quite a bit. And then one you maybe not hear quite so much about is clay pipes. Now there is also another pipe that's similar to this, I'd say in a similar category, called Meerschaum. And Meerschaum and clay pipes have their own unique qualities, as do corn cobs. Each pipe material is going to have different qualities and reasons for why people use them for different things. A corn cob, for example, has quite a neutral taste. When you use a corn cob, you're not going to get something like ghosting. And with a Briar pipe, if you smoke, say, a very strong English blend in it, and then you smoke an aromatic, you may get something that's called ghosting, where you get the taste of the previous tobacco in that next smoke. So that's why people often do quite enjoy using something like a corn cob. And the same is true actually for Meerschaum and for clay pipes. They give a very neutral taste and they don't ghost very easily. They also have properties such as they wick the moisture quite well. So a Meerschaum pipe will actually pull the moisture out of the tobacco and into the pipe itself, giving you a very cool smoke. And a similar thing happens with a clay pipe. So that's why you'll find people often talk about the different reasons they choose a specific type of pipe. There is one other category that's called calabash pipes. I don't have one of those either, but I'll show you what that looks like. There's probably other ones as well, but these are just the main ones that you're going to hear people normally discussing when they're choosing a pipe. Now we're going to look at something that can be very confusing when you first start, and that's understanding pipe shape and how it relates to the categorization of the pipe. So for example, you can get the same pipe. This is technically called an apple. One's called a bent apple because it's got a bent stem, and one's a straight apple. So if you don't know that, it can be a little bit confusing. You might hear people talking about an apple or bent apple, something like that. And that's all it's really referring to. So you have the shape first of all, and then you have followed by the stem shape. So that's the same here. This would be called a billiard. And these effectively are the same pipe, but one would be a bent billiard and one would be a straight billiard, because they're effectively the same pipe but just in a different package. Again here, this would be called a pot, I believe, and again you can get drastically different looking pipes, but they're effectively the same pipe. They both have the same bowl shape. So, you know, it's hard sometimes to get your head around this, but that's really all it is. I had to just quickly fact check myself because I thought I might have got this wrong, but as you can see, I misspoke earlier. This is actually a calabash shape. It's not a pot shape. A pot shape doesn't have this very subtle bend here. It's just straight like a pot. So I misspoke there. So sorry about that. As you can see, I don't know everything. This is also a learning experience for me. And here we have something I scraped from the internet. It's about the simplest diagram I could find without being too complicated. And I don't think all of these are completely accurate, to be honest. For a start, I'm not sure you consider this an egg. To me, that looks more like an apple, but maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, this is an apple. I would say that's almost the same. But anyway, I think the majority of them are roughly correct. I know that that is a Lovat shape. Poker, bulldog, apple, billiard, bent billiard, pot, Dublin. This is one I wasn't that familiar with. Rhodesian, I've seen quite a few of these. They look really nice. Canadian, I think why you consider this Canadian is because the shank or the stem here, I'm not sure what part that is, but it's oval, I believe. It's not tubular like most pipes. And again, this one I wasn't familiar with. Ohm Paul, I didn't know. This is what you consider a pot shape, I believe. And obviously the church warden as well. Normally I think church warden has a slightly bent stem, but this one is depicted with a straight stem. So yeah, I'm not sure how accurate all of these are. Just a quick overview of the shapes. Now we're going to quickly look at the different finishes that you get. Now you do get other finishes as well, but these are probably the main finishes you're going to hear people talk about. Probably the one that is most synonymous with a wooden pipe is just a smooth finish, where you have just the wood, and it's normally buffed or polished to sort of a beautiful wood finish. And these can be all different natural wood finishes. They can be unstained. Yeah, really there's so many, it's impossible to go over every one, but all you need to know is that would be known as wood finish. And you can get obviously dark wood finish, light wood finish. It's just endless really, the different finishes you get with wood. The next one that's maybe a little bit easier to get your head around is a sandblasted finish. And this is basically where the wood is sandblasted with sand, and it basically works away the natural grain of the wood, takes away the smooth finish that you would get like here, where this is where the pipe would have started, and then it's been sandblasted away to reveal the grain of the wood. This can be really lovely because it's very tactile to hold, and I think it looks very great as well, this type of finish. And then you're going to have, this is also very commonly spoken about, is a rusticated finish, which is basically where the maker will take some kind of tool and rusticate it, or either use some sort of Dremel tool or a sort of scratching tool that will reveal in a similar way to this, but it's just man-made instead of sort of using the sand. And again, this is often people like this because it gives a nice feel in the hand. It feels very nice to hold. It's very tactile. I mean, they all are really. They all have their own quality. Each one will give you a different feel in the hand and a different aesthetic. But those are the main finishes you're going to see. There is others as well, but these are just the basic that you're going to see people speak about the most. One more consideration is the stem. So the material that the piece that goes in your mouth is made out of. The three most common materials you're going to see is acrylic. A lot of Savinelli pipes use this very beautiful ornate finish on their pipes, and that will generally be acrylic. That's how they get that finish. And this is quite nice to use, but it has a little bit of a different quality to using something called vulcanite, which is what this is. And vulcanite is a little bit of a softer material. So when it goes into your mouth, if you were to bite onto this, it has a slightly softer, more maybe like rubbery feel than something that's quite as hard as acrylic. And then a step down from both of those would be plastic. This is sort of the same as this, but obviously it's a lower quality material. So I would say avoid this if you can. I personally don't really like using plastic because you're introducing heat into something that's not really good when it's going into your mouth. The next thing you're going to want to consider is the best pipe to choose for the particular tobacco that you enjoy smoking. For example, when you smoke Virginia tobacco, Virginia typically is a very wet tobacco, and what this does, it creates quite a lot of heat when you smoke it, and this can produce tongue bite. So different pipes are going to give you different experiences, and they are kind of made sometimes with a particular tobacco in mind. For example, a pipe that's much longer like this is typically going to handle a wet, hot smoking tobacco better. The time it takes for the smoke to get to this end, you're going to get heat dissipation, and so by the time it gets here, it's going to be much cooler than if you're smoking in, say, something very short like this. The heat is going to instantly hit your mouth and it's going to hit your tongue very quickly. So that's why people often choose a longer pipe for something like Virginia. Also, you're going to see people using things like Meerschaum or clay with Virginia because, again, it has very good absorbent qualities, and so it helps to dissipate any heat or moisture that you get in the tobacco by actually absorbing it into the pipe itself. And that's also where you get filters. So this, for example, is a 9mm filtered pipe. So I could also put a filter in the chamber here. So again, that would create another barrier for the moisture, so that by the time the smoke gets to here, you're just going to get cooler, dry smoke onto your mouth, and it's not going to burn your tongue. You get different types of filters, and this one takes a 6mm filter. So this is also a really nice pipe for Virginias because it gives you a little bit longer for the pipe, the smoke, to actually get to the mouth, so it doesn't burn you. And this pipe, you could also put a bolster wood filter in here, and it's also just doing the same thing. It's just absorbing some of that moisture, so by the time it gets here, you're not going to get a burnt tongue. Now, aromatics, in my experience, generally don't give you as much tongue bite as something like Virginia, but it can be there, and I think that's often because aromatics do often use Virginia as the base for most of the aromatics that I've smoked. A lot of people actually use, me included, a corncob to smoke aromatics because they're quite a neutral smoke experience. You're not going to worry about ghosting this. So aromatics is something where you'll often hear people concerned about ghosting their pipes. If they have an English pipe that they use for English blends, then they don't always want the taste of, say, cinnamon or maple syrup in that blend. It's not something I really worry about too much. I more just enjoy using a corncob for certain properties that it has. Like, it seems to, maybe my imagination, but it gives you a slightly sweeter taste when you use a corncob. And yeah, you can put a filter in this as well. So in my experience, I've found using a corncob is really good. I've also just started experimenting with clay pipes, and I've also found that these are really great for aromatics. And again, you don't really get any ghosting with a clay pipe, and you can obviously get longer clay pipes as well. So even if you had some heat issues, it could be a really good option for aromatics. In my experience, English blends, you don't really have to worry very much about tongue bite and things like that. You can generally actually just smoke English blends straight out the tin. So I don't even normally worry drying my English blends unless I've literally just bought it. Then you may want to dry out a little bit. What this means is you don't have to worry about tongue bite, and so you can actually use much shorter pipes. And I also don't even worry with filters with English blends. I do quite enjoy using a system pipe, and that's a pipe that has a little chamber here so that any moisture that maybe comes up into here will just land in the reservoir here. I really love using a system pipe with English blends because even if you do get a tiny bit, it's not going to give you tongue bite, but anything that you do get, it will just gather here. I also really enjoy using a pipe having a slightly wider circumference here. It tends to give me a better taste with English blends, and I've heard other people talk about this, and I think it's a very subjective thing, but I do find I enjoy smoking English blends much more with a bowl that has wider circumference. English blends really allow you to use almost any pipe. You don't have to worry too much. Something to be aware of though is that if you're going to smoke English blends, you may want to avoid using a pipe that you use, say, aromatics in, because if it's got a lot of something like Latakia has quite a strong taste and it's going to maybe ghost your pipe. So this might not be something you really worry about. But if you don't want the taste of an English blend in your aromatics, you may want to avoid mixing the two pipes together. Another point that's important to consider when choosing the pipe that's best for you is how long you actually may want to smoke for. So for example, this is my biggest pipe and this is my smallest Briar pipe. The difference between these two pipes is not just the size. Technically, it's possible to get a pipe this size, but with a bowl the same size as this. The bowl meaning how big the chamber inside the pipe is. So what you want to do is you actually want to look at the depth. These are the two most important things. How deep the bowl actually goes from the top to the bottom. Whenever you buy a pipe, they're going to have these dimensions. There's going to be a lot of dimensions about the size and the length and all that, but really the most important dimensions to remember is the depth of the bowl. So just on a visual way, you could put your finger into it and this one comes just past the first knuckle, and then also the diameter or the circumference. So how big this is, because if you put these two numbers together, you're going to work out the capacity of the pipe. If you took this pipe, for example, which is enormous, this is a really big pipe, this goes up to the second knuckle, and it's also significantly got a bigger diameter. I think this is a maybe 22 or 23 millimeter diameter. This is something like 17 or maybe even smaller, 16 millimeter diameter. So there's quite a big difference in the size and the capacity of how much tobacco these will take. And in case it's not obvious, how much tobacco you put in the pipe is generally means how long it will take to smoke it. This isn't a hard and fast rule. Sometimes a bigger pipe like this, it actually smokes quite quickly. So you will go through the tobacco quite fast in a big pipe sometimes. But as a general rule, the smaller the capacity of the chamber, the quicker you're going to be able to smoke that pipe. Obviously, the way that you smoke it also plays a role. A bigger pipe, you do tend to smoke it faster because it's got thicker walls and it can take being smoked quicker than a smaller pipe, which is more delicate and it takes a little bit more care. You can't smoke this too fast because you don't want to overheat the bowl. So that's just a few considerations for size. Now the next section is maybe the most subjective section. So I'm just going to talk about how I think about my different pipes and why I choose them for different things. The first one I'm going to talk about is the pipe that you're going to probably use whilst at home. So in different scenarios, you're going to want to choose different pipes. And this is why people end up with so many different pipes, because really every pipe has trade-offs that have good things and bad things about them. So you're not going to want to use every pipe in every situation. I mean, you could, but it might be a little bit difficult. For example, if you're going to use a very big pipe, I could go and walk around the field with this and do some, some travel or something. But this is quite a heavy, big pipe. And where something like this really shines is the shape of it. It's quite nice to use where you say sitting at a desk or sitting in a chair, and you can just hang it like this, and it's a nice comfortable pipe to hold. You're not worried about the weight or something like that. Same with this one. They're big pipes. They're not necessarily going to be great for traveling or walking around, but they're good for as chin hangers, and if you're working, and if you want a long smoke where you're not going to have to keep filling up the bowl every 5 minutes because it's such a small pipe. The next one, and probably these are the ones that I have the most of, are what I would call going out pipes, walking pipes, traveling pipes. And again, these are quite small. They're very easy to clench because they're straight. They're normally easy to put in a pocket or something like that and travel to take with you. They're not too heavy, so that you could, you know, something like this tiny little pipe that I've got, you could take this out in your pocket with a lighter, and it's very easy just to have a quick smoke and to clench it. You could travel with that as well. It's very light, so it's a good all-round going out pipe if you wanted to do something like that. You also might want to consider whether it's something that you want to keep in good condition, and that's where something like a corn cob might come in, because although this is a great travel pipe, this is also quite an expensive pipe. So compared to something like this, which is very cheap, you could take this out and you could lose it or break it. It's only cheap, so you're not going to worry too much. So, or even if you're working in the garden, you can use this. A few things you have to consider though with something like this is also what it's like to clench. I find a corn cob, or this particular one, very difficult to clench because it's so front heavy. It sort of pulls down too much. So that's also something you might want to consider. You might also want to consider the aesthetics that you're going to choose, because you know every pipe's going to have a different look, and that's, I think, quite an important thing, because the aesthetic is often what makes you go back to a pipe. You look at it and you think, I want to smoke that pipe. So something that has really beautiful aesthetics, like this Savinelli that I have, it can often inspire you to smoke it. So there's a few considerations for what I think about when choosing different pipes and the situations I want to use them in. Now I've come over to the computer, I'm going to quickly go through one particular brand, and I'm going to try and show with examples what I look at when choosing a pipe and how that brand is categorizing their pipes. I'm still not an expert on this. I'm still learning how this works myself. But by showing you one brand, hopefully it helps you to understand a little bit better what's going on and how they're actually putting their pipes into a catalogue so that you can find them and choose the one you like. Each brand is different. They're going to have different ways of doing this, but I think by understanding one brand, it might help you to then be able to work out how the other brands do their categorizing, how it works. Okay, here we are on the Peterson website. Now, I've chosen Peterson because it's probably the brand I'm most familiar with, and I'm just going to try and show you how they categorize their pipes. Let's just start with this, for example, system pipes. So we already discussed system pipes, and then as you'll be able to see, within system pipes, we have all these different categories like deluxe system ebony, deluxe system natural, system spigot smooth. So let's click on one of these, and you might think that's all, but within these categories, there's even more. So then once you're in smooth, then we've got all the different shapes and types within that as well. So as you can see, there's just so many different pipes, but by understanding how to sort of move through each section, hopefully it can help you see. Then you have all the different shapes. What we spoke about before, this was sort of like similar to the shape that I showed you before, my pipe. Then you've got obviously bent billiards, apples, bent apples, pot shapes, all different shapes within this. This is also a pot, I think. All different shapes within that particular niche. On top of that, we also have runs of pipes. For example, Sherlock Holmes. So within the Sherlock Holmes styling, we're again going to have many different categories. So for example, if I just click on this one, Sherlock Holmes Natural. Within the natural category, you're then going to access different shapes and different sizes. Yeah, this can be quite tricky to get your head around at first. Again, see the apple, this sort of pot shape, a billiard, bent billiards, all different shapes within that category itself. So not only do you have Sherlock Holmes, but you have categories within that. Ebony, see? So if you click on that, within the ebony line, you're going to get basically quite a lot of the same shapes and a lot of the same size pipes, just in different flavors and different forms. There's also going to be things like the bands that go around them. They are sometimes made from different materials, such as some will use silver, some will use nickel, some even use gold sometimes. There's going to be different materials that the pipes are made from. And then you're going to get things more specific, such as church wardens. Obviously, they can't really put every different type of pipe within each of the, say, Sherlock Holmes. They couldn't have every single pipe that they make. So then they subcategorize things, like more specialized things, like a church warden, that will have its own category. And again, these are divided up into finishes with church wardens. So ebony, silver mounted, rusticated, sandblasted, smooth. And then similar to Sherlock Holmes, you're going to get a similar thing with, say, Dracula pipes. You're going to get much of the same pipes, but often in their own flavors, their own unique designs, but often you can buy the same pipe within a different flavor. So you could get a Sherlock Holmes pipe, for example, maybe similar aesthetic to this with the rustication and maybe the apple. But then you're going to have certain details are going to be different, like the stem that they've used. I think this is probably nickel, things like that. So hopefully helps to explain the different ways that they categorize these things. And every pipe maker is going to have their own way of doing this. You'll have to just look. Savinelli is also a very famous make, and they have their own way of categorizing it, but hopefully by me showing you how Peterson does it and giving you a little bit of an overview, it can help you navigate which pipe you may want to buy. Okay, now last but not least, I wanted to show you my own collection and maybe talk about why I chose the pipes that I chose. I've already kind of covered this already, but I'm just going to maybe help to show the whole thing together, so maybe it makes a bit more sense. Now this is how my pipe section looks like. It sits on the side of my cabinet, and basically this is what I look at each day when I come to decide what I want to smoke. So in the mornings I often like to start the day with an English, and this is where I put my English pipes. And again, this is just the way that I do it. Everybody approaches the way that they choose their pipes and what they smoke in them differently. I know that a lot of people say they just like to smoke everything in their pipe and they don't really worry about, you know, whether it ghosts or something like that. And to be honest, I don't really worry too much about ghosting either, but I have found that I prefer smoking certain things out of certain pipes. For example, I really love, one of my favorite shapes is an apple shaped pipe, and this was my first pipe actually. And I really fell in love with this pipe. I didn't think I'd like it very much at the beginning because, yeah, I wasn't really, I wouldn't say massively drawn to the apple shape. But after actually having one and feeling what it feels like in the hand, I just fell in love with this pipe. It really made me want to buy another apple pipe. I've been buying apple pipes now because I really enjoy the shape. I really enjoy the way it feels in the hand, the aesthetic. Also, from a thermodynamics point of view, it's a very good practical shape because you get a lot of wall on the sides. So unlike with some pipes that don't have very much at all on the sides, so this will heat up quite quickly. An apple, and I mean it's even more exaggerated on something like that, you can see you're not going to worry too much about it getting hot and overheating very quickly. So an apple is a really lovely shape. Aesthetically, I like the way it looks, and practically, for me, it's probably the perfect balance between aesthetics and practicality. And I've got 2 bent apples and 1 straight apple. These pipes I tend to smoke at home when I'm sitting down because the bent shape lends itself quite well to clenching, and it's nice and easy just to smoke while you're indoors. None of my English pipes that I smoke English blends in, none of them take filters. So I don't need a filter because, like I mentioned before, they just don't really require one for my usage. When I do need a filter, then that's when I start to smoke something like Virginia or even Aromatics. And I've got a similar thought process, but just with a filter. So I really like this sort of bigger pipe that I use, more like a house pipe. This is a new acquisition, so I've not had much use with this yet, but from my experience I've used it so far, it's been just a beautiful pipe to smoke. This takes a 9mm filter. It's got also a P-lip. It makes for a really lovely smoking experience. Slightly longer, so it's really good for Virginias. I'm really starting to experiment now with clay pipes, and I've got to say I've been enjoying using a clay pipe so much for Virginia blends, particularly the longer ones. I've found they're absolutely marvelous for that. So I've been experimenting a little bit with them. So these are new additions to my collection. I've started adding these into my rotation as well for Virginia. So this is just how I kind of approach it. Hopefully that gives you some sort of understanding of what I choose and why I choose it. Okay, so let's just very quickly put all that together then. So firstly, choosing the pipe for the tobacco you enjoy. If you're just going to smoke English blends, this isn't really something you need to think about. But if you do choose to smoke Aromatics and Virginias, you may want to consider something that has a longer stem and a filter. Secondly, choosing the right pipe for the situation you're going to be in. Again, this is not so important if you just plan to be at home and you're not going to go out walking or traveling with your pipe. But if you're going to be traveling and moving around, you may want to choose something that's lightweight and easy to clench. And thirdly, the aesthetics. This is obviously a very subjective and personal thing, but there is some practical considerations. For example, if you're going to choose a high gloss finish, you may want to think about that in terms of will it get scratched and how practical that will be. So then you might want to think about rustication or sandblast finish. Hopefully that helped a little bit. I know there's a lot of information here and a lot of it is my opinion and the way I look at things. So if there's more experienced pipe smokers can add to this, maybe tell me things that I missed out. I mean, I know there's going to be lots of things I missed out. I had to work within the confines of what you can fit into a short YouTube video. But hopefully it's useful to someone. Anyway, thanks very much for watching and I'll catch you in the next one.